Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery preparing to check in on a couple of my worm bins. I'm going to see if I could recite some of the information about these systems from memory without peeking on the board. These are my original red wiggler worms. They're at the present time 257 days of age. 12 days have passed since we last checked in on these little guys when they received their 22nd feeding. I got it right. And during the last feeding, one thing I don't have mentioned on the board here is a little weird thing going on. Not so weird, I would assume, because I've seen it on other systems and other worm channels. Well, let's get the camera trained down and I'll show you exactly what I'm referring to. The weird thing going on here is little itsy bitsy tiny snails. In a couple of my previous videos, I could even see them all over this plastic. They're very, very small though. And like I said, I don't think it's that uncommon because I have seen other videos of people on their YouTube channels trying to deal with these little suckers. They're all over the plastic here. Perhaps I'll run the video back quickly just so you could see them moving around. They should be visible on the video if I speed it up and zoom in a bit for you. They're very, very slow movers. Unless I increase the speed of the video playback considerably, they're virtually unnoticeable because of their extremely slow speed. I guess that is the one thing that snails are kind of famous for, isn't it? Well, I think you get the idea. If you're a regular here on my channel, you've seen me showcasing these little snails over and over again, even on occasion getting really, really close with a high magnification macro filter on my DSLR camera. So I tried a little something with these little plastic lids to see if we can possibly round up some of the snails. I put beer traps out, these things had some beer resting in them. At the end of the last video, we placed a little bit of beer into each of those little plastic cups or lids, and I came back the following day. It seemed to me like the beer was gone. I don't know if it evaporated, it spilled out, whatever the case may be, but it just seemed to me like something I didn't really have a great deal of interest in maintaining and checking in on and replenishing the beer supply in. So I just sort of abandoned it almost as quickly as it started. Looks like our top coverings of newspaper have held up quite nicely. Offhand, I don't recall from the previous check-in how well they were still holding up, but I would say that the worms have been quite busy nibbling on all this paper, and that could have something to do with the fact that we've not really included bedding with our feedings, and basically bedding is the source of a more carbon heavy food source that the worms turn to when they're kind of done eating the more nitrogen rich kitchen scraps that they get when they're trying to help us break down our household waste. Kitchen scraps is what I mean by that. Household waste, junk mail, newspaper, that's household waste too, but that stuff, when you shred it up, it can be used by the worms as bedding and then ultimately as a carbon rich food source. So since I've been just feeding kind of on the surface, just laying down the foods, last time we took the leftover banana peels that we found from a previous feeding and laid them out here in a circle around those little plastic lids, and I believe that this stem right here that we're spotting, and here's another one, another stem of the banana peel, is all that appears to be left. During the last check-in, those banana peels were pretty far gone already, but we had enough there to sort of encircle the plastic. And these stems will probably be gone pretty soon too. They're making some really good progress. So I think we're going to follow suit with what we've been doing in here, which is to sort of till through the material. We'll start here in bin number 1. We'll till through the material just to get a sense of how things are in general. Do the worms look happy and healthy? To me, they certainly do. Are they occupying the system throughout? They do seem to be doing that, and that's been the reason I've been laying out their food across the entire top surface lately, versus following my typical method of digging a trench down the middle and submerging their food in one spot. I do want to have the worms cruising all over the systems, working down leftover bits of material that's still in the bin, leftover bits of food, leftover bits of bedding. You might have saw me breaking apart something over there a moment ago. That was a little chunk of corn cob I found. I figured perhaps if we break it into a number of smaller bits, then we increase its overall surface area, resulting in more area for the worms to approach that food by, leaving less of it kind of inaccessible to being eaten by being inside of the chunk of material. Today I don't have the sort of food we gave them last time. Last time I took these radish leaves and spread them out across the top, and it did seem like they were a popular item because there was a lot of casting material spread out across the entire bin when we first popped our heads in here. And I guess just from the traffic too, it seemed like they did a number on those top covering newspapers. There's a good bit of moisture in here too. I can usually tell when the stuff just sticks to my glove the way it does right here. And I believe with the moisture level being a little bit high here, we stand a pretty good chance of seeing the material in this system get pretty heavily broken down. I mean, it's almost there already, and in fact, I'm even debating whether we want to continue with this level of moisture in here or perhaps switch over from plastic coverings to something a little bit more porous and capable of allowing for some airflow to pass through it. I'm beginning to wonder if just some sort of a paper-based top covering would be beneficial here to allow the systems to begin drying. You know, 257 days of age, it's getting up there. And it might be time to start gearing these systems up for harvest, and it is always easier to harvest whether you're sifting. It's a lot easier to have dry, flaky material that can pass through your sifter easily and be screened. Or if you've got material that doesn't even need to be screened with very little large chunk debris in it, then you can almost just migrate the worms out of the material. And then again, having something a little bit drier is beneficial from the point of view that once you set up a migration zone to try to attract the worms into it, where you do have a good plentiful amount of moisture, having a system where the moisture has gradually been dropping will get the worms motivated to seek out a more damp, comfortable place to move into, and they'll voluntarily evacuate their finished castings just by setting up a migration feeding zone that's damp and replenished with food regularly. And then after they've evacuated their castings, the harvest just consists of scooping the material out and then relocating the worms into a new home. And that could possibly be the way we play it in here, migrating the worms out. But that would definitely be easier if the material were a little bit drier, such that the worms are actively looking for something a little bit more damp, a little bit more to their liking. Well, still debating, you know, because there is still signs in here of stuff that I'd like the worms to continue working down, namely these little leaf stems. It must have been kind of late in the game that I still came in here with some of my leaf supply as bedding material. And if you look around, you'll see a good bit of this stuff. I mean, it's definitely very fragile, breaks easily, pretty thin, and showing signs of wear, but it's still present in good amounts. And if we were to leave a good bit of moisture in here, then the worms can continue working that stuff down. So I think we will simply cover with plastic once again to allow the good active breakdown process of the residual material in these systems to continue. But we're going to feed in a very similar way to what we did last time, which is to surface feed for that, I've got some small particle size stuff, coffee and worm chow. And you know, instead of leaving it on the surface, do we want to blend it in, or is it better on the surface? I don't know. The worms do seem to come to the surface in pursuit of food. So why don't we just stick to doing it that way? That's the way we've been doing it in a number of my systems where I've been wanting to drive the system to completion. I've been not focusing the food in one particular spot, but instead I've been spreading it around. So we'll do the same here today. Kind of get the coffee all over the place out here on the surface. I mean, there's almost no way to easily distinguish it from the surrounding material. It just blends in as if it were just more castings. So I'm just kind of spreading it to the best of my ability and then attempting to brush it around in the hopes that I'm evenly distributing it across the top surface. And to some degree that could almost count as they're feeding, but you know what we're going to do is we're going to put in some of my worm chow here. This stuff is clearly much easier to see out on the surface, so a little bit additional small particle size stuff for them to come off and nip off the surface. So I think this is good. This is the sort of stuff that's pretty much guaranteed to leave no leftovers whatsoever. And then as far as you know, a carbon-based food item to complement the kitchen scrap type stuff that they're getting, I guess we'll return this paper. Some of it had been folded over on itself to sort of reinforce the edge of the top covering newspaper. If we spread it out here a little bit, it might make it a little bit easier as a single layer to be broken down by the worms as they cruise the surface, eat the coffee and worm chow, and then also nibble away at the paper, which is ultimately just wood pulp, right? Paper is wood pulp, and it's right up their alley. It's definitely a food source. So most people shred this stuff and use it as a bedding material for the worms to live in, but ultimately it does double as a food for the worms to consume after they're kind of done eating a more nitrogen-rich kitchen scraps type food. This helps them kind of maintain balance in their diet between nitrogen-rich foods and more carbon-heavy type foods. And I believe that by spreading this paper out, just based on what we saw here from the last time to this time, especially by it being a single layer and also by it being positioned right underneath where the plastic's going to be, I'm guessing that this stuff is going to, for the most part, be gone, if not entirely gone, by the next time we come in here. And yeah, you might have noticed I'm making no attempt to resurrect the traps that we had attempted to, you know, round up snails with. Whatever. Let the snails be. And oops, leaving castings dropping all over my table. I'm going to have a little bit of cleanup to do here afterwards. And yeah, the other thing I neglected to return were the feeding zone indicators. Well, coffee filters are what I use as feeding zone indicators in my worm bin feedings. But that's usually when I've got a particular place in the bin where I'm feeding, whether it's a corner, whether it's an edge, whether it's just the middle. That's where I'll typically put the indicator down to show where we last fed to help us remember. But here, when I'm spreading the food out all across the surface, it seems irrelevant to include a feeding zone indicator. So I'll just set those aside and we'll get some use out of them at some other point in the future. So that's it for the video, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.